All right, well, let's get it officially started then. Welcome everyone to Global Peoria. This is our bi-monthly discussion of international news. And this week we are delighted to have Dr. Elmo Roach. I believe you go by Joe though.
Yes,
Joe Roach
please.
with us.
Yes, please.
Joe is an emeritus faculty member of the Department of History at Bradley University. He taught there from 1968 to 2004, and he has been around and doing other things ever since. He's not quit quite for real. He has a bachelor's from the University of Dayton and a master's and PhD from Ohio State University. He is most infamous for teaching courses about Russian history, and that's how our paths have crossed. But lately he is looking at ancient societies south of the border. He's going to be offering another presentation on the Mayan civilizations based on some of his visits to sites in Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize for Ali in May. So after we enjoy his conversation about Russia and Ukraine tonight, we can see what he knows about the Mayans later.
Have a knife, please.
All right, if you wouldn't mind, everybody mute yourselves or I'll mute you. And then you can unmute later when it's time to ask questions. Take us away, Shelley.
Well, thank you, Angela. I guess now I don't have to introduce Joe because you did such a good job of doing that.
Oh.
And here I looked up his bio too. Joe, it sounds like our paths crossed at Bradley. I showed up in 07 and you left in 06. I hope there's not a connection there, but certainly your record, your reputation was there even after you left. So in a very positive way. So tonight, sports fans, we are going to talk about Russia. It's a little country you may have heard of east of Europe. And remarkably, Angela Weck is not our talent tonight. We have Joe Roach here, although I'm sure Angela won't be able to restrain herself. And so I did some research last night, I think now I was fully prepared. And about an hour ago, I called up the New York Times just to see if anything, and lo and behold, the Czech Republic expelled 60 Russian diplomats from Prague. So I guess it's still percolating and they are at odds. But Joe, before we get into that, obviously the first thing, Angela must have known this was coming. Our friend Vladimir gave his State of the Nation address yesterday, I believe. What did we learn from that? And what was his message that we did? What was the message that he wanted U.S. and others to hear? And welcome.
Thank you, Marianne. That's what it says under your name.
Yeah. My wife is too lazy to change it, but maybe I'll try to do that.
It's happened to me more than once. Okay, to answer your question quickly, yes, I followed the news. And by the way, the latest thing is that the troops on the Ukrainian border are going back into their barracks because they've made their point, whatever that is. I will answer about what I think about Putin by quoting a very famous American president, Teddy Roosevelt, one of my favorites as far as foreign policy. And you know, Teddy maybe his most famous statement was, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." In the case of Putin, it's been changed around because basically with Putin, it's speak loudly because you got a shrinking stick. So a lot of what he does is posturing, and he's not holding very good cards. As a matter of fact, the situation in Russia is quite perilous. And I hope we have a chance to chat a little about the economy. Although I'm not an economic determinist, the availability of resources has a lot to do with shaping geopolitics. And he is getting shorter and shorter on cash every day. So does that answer it for you, or?
Sure, we can talk. So why is he, what's the purpose of the saber rattling, the red line? the boisterous rhetoric? What's he trying to accomplish?
Well, you know, if you're in Las Vegas, you would say this guy's bluffing. Because if you got real cards, you don't have to posture like that. So the deal is, I see it, and we're only talking about opinion now, so it's quite okay if anyone doesn't see it this way. But by and large, part of it's psychological, Shelley. He has to project this sense of strength for domestic purposes. And somebody like Biden has already figured him out. And it's not going to get easier for Putin because Biden certainly understands that Putin is no longer playing with the full deck. And as unrest begins to unfold in Russia, I'm not going to predict that there'll be a revolution. I think that's remote at best. But it puts him under increasing pressure to continue this posture. His whole history's this way. He's old KGB, riding around on a horse without a shirt on and playing hockey matches against select goofballs. It's all projecting this image of strongman. You need me, I'm the strongman, because we Russians, it's like old Jackie Mason. We get no respect unless we got a strong man, and that's me. And what happens with the strong man when things don't go their way? They get desperate. And I'm not saying that he's going to be a pushover. And as a matter of fact, he could get more dangerous instead of less. But he really doesn't have a lot to play with. And he's surrounded by some very vicious players in his upper elite, and one waiver, one trip, and he knows what happens in Russian history.
So I would remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will get to them. What does Putin understanding, I'm sure he understands his position, and I think how you explain it certainly makes sense. What does he want from a relationship now with the US?
It's probably easier for me to say what he doesn't want. He doesn't want the sanctions. He doesn't want the restrictions on financial dealings. Most importantly, there are about 20 or 24 people in the clique, in the elite, that have about 40% of the resources of the nation. That's economic disparity in the worst case. A couple dozen people controlling 40% of the resources. And he, of course, is in there himself. And he, of course, is garnering what he can. None of these people are driven by ideology. That's what makes it so hard for some commentators to understand. They have no ideology other than let's make a killing. And for 20 years, they've been fleecing the Russian economy. Well, that was okay as long as there was plenty of oil and gas money and they could get away with it. But all that has fallen apart in the last half a dozen years. And so he could easily become the victim of those around him. When you rule with a small elite, it's easier to target them than if it's a broad popular movement. He is not the leader of a broad popular movement, but that makes him understand he's all the more vulnerable.
So what has happened to the oil and gas revenue that for a while put Russia in the pink?
Okay, and by the way, well, greetings from Las Cruces, New Mexico, where I visited with 40 miles from the border. And this state has a lot of gas and oil up in the northwest corner, and our neighbors in Texas too. So when I talk about gas and oil, it isn't just Russia that's impacted, but Shelley, that's a terrific question. And the best way to answer it is to quote a couple of numbers. So in 2008, which was the absolute highest point for oil prices, I don't have anything better to do than read petroleum magazines and check out the daily. So, you know, I'm retired. I got nothing but time on my hands. So I try to follow this stuff. Well, in 2008, the price per barrel of oil was $145. That's the highest ever in history. And so naturally, a lot of money was rolling in for Putin. And so that's when he was at his maximum popularity. He could fund this, he could fund that. Today, Shelley, I just took another look. Today, the price of oil is $63 a barrel. That's a drop of 60%. And natural gas is even worse. And his whole budget, 3/4 of it is based upon export revenue generated by gas and oil. A couple 20 years ago, they made a gamble. The gamble was on gas and oil. It was rising. We're gonna rise with this tide. Well, the game is over. And in the case of gas, not to be esoteric about it, but that's measured in something we call British thermal units per million. I won't bore you with what that means, but here's the dollar figure. In 2008, again, same date, it was $15 per million BTUs. Today, it's $3.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, I just checked, it's $2.69.
Going in the wrong direction for him.
That's a drop of 80%. If you look together at gas and oil, it's been an enormous, nearly 3/4 drop in revenue, and he is totally dependent upon, unlike the Chinese who gambled on a diverse economy. The Russians went in with extraction, with gas and oil and minerals and so on. And now he's stuck. Do you know what does this do to the ordinary Russian citizen? Their purchasing power in the last 5 years has dropped 20%. So imagine that. As prices go up, the ordinary Russian's income goes down. The year for retirement is expanded 4 or 5 years. And today you asked about his speech. He promised them the moon. But
Well, I was gonna get to that. He talked about summer camps for kids and child support payments, and so I was wondering, is that what's behind those sorts of promises, that the growing middle class in Russia, which was expanding in the good times, they want something.
And they're declining now. Oh, listen, you can go to Moscow, you can go to Petersburg, you'll see a lot of BMWs and Mercedes and guys with Rolex watches and dollies in the taverns and so on. But for the ordinary Russians, the bulk of the population, these are very bad times. That, looking as a historian, reminds one, at least it reminds me, of how bad it was toward the end of the Soviet era. This is a steady deterioration, and none of this is based on ideology. So the Russian people are saying, wait a second, it's okay if you are the dictator, but we got a bargain with you, and the bargain is we get something out of that. And so today he's promising the moon, but I think Angela will tell you the Russians are not stupid. They're starting to figure this out, that these are empty promises. And what happens with a dictator? when the empty promises begin to add up, it's not a good situation to be in.
So is this economic uncertainty or unhappiness behind some of the movement we see in the streets, demonstrators?
I think Angela would agree it's probably a combination. For ordinary Russians who are not out in the streets, they're very upset. And for those who can afford to be out in the street, and they tend to be a younger generation. I mean, folks like us don't go out into the street very often. But the younger generation, attuned to what's going on among their elders, their parents, their loved ones, that's part of their motivation for being in the street. There is, as I see it, a rather growing call for reforms. Some journalists will interpret that to mean there's going to be a political revolution. And like everywhere else in the world, politics comes into play. So those people out in the streets are reformers in some cases, and simply anti-establishment people in other cases, and or beyond that, people who have come to despise Putin and his clique. They just don't trust them. There's a, well, I say they, I should say there's a growing number of people that just don't trust this, because it's not like saying we don't trust communism. There is no ideology. It's not liberalism, it's not conservatism, it's just capture all the money you can get.
And do those protests or protesters, do they in fact pressure the Putin regime, or are they just an irritant?
No, the more they do this, the more pressure is generated, because I'm trying to approach this, and I don't know if I'm right or not, from a right hand, left hand kind of thing. The bulk of the population is upset because, do you know 1/5 of the people don't have running toilets in their housing? The further out east you go, the more you're going to find privies outdoors. They don't even have the basics. So we're looking at ordinary Russians with their income declining and their conditions. We'll talk about health if you like, which is horrible in Russia. But that's the right hand. The left hand is the political unrest. And any social scientist would tell you that's a very explosive situation.
And so,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, when you have a large scale civic unrest and political activists, that's the right hand, left hand. And Putin is too smart not to realize the implication. So he goes today and offers the moon.
And so how does Navalny play into this? That's one. Second question, that is he effective? And I said Bush, Biden's threat that if he dies, there'll be a price to pay. Is that just baloney, or is that, what prices are going to be to pay? So that's kind of three questions all about Navalny.
I'm glad you brought him up. I'm going to be curious to see if I get a reaction from Angela or anybody else. But Navalny is a symbol, okay? And he is a part of a larger protest movement that is growing daily, monthly, yearly, okay? But unfortunately, as I see it, in the West, he becomes the protest. And it's simple-minded journalism. Excuse me, Shelley, but man bites dog is the story. Who's the champion? Who's the prize fighter? Let's simplify it down to, and Navalny, to use the old French expression, is cause célèbre right now.
Right.
Okay, the sad thing is, he's a funny character. there are two Navalny's, not one. The one Navalny that we're looking at all the time in the news, and Biden even makes the comment, he's the Nobel Prize wannabe. He's the martyr on the media, okay? He is anti-Putin. And if you're anti-Putin, that's all we care about. That's good. We like that. The other part, the other number two Navalny is he's a xenophobic Russian nationalist who participated in something called the March Russia movement, which is get rid of foreigners, get rid of immigrants. I don't know if I can get the word for Angela correctly, but he talks about the Central Asians, the Chechens, and so on as tarakani. The translation of that is cockroaches. So all Muslims are cockroaches. The Jewish population in Russia is very uncertain about him because he doesn't just pick one group. It's if you're the white nationalist Orthodox group, that was his main claim to fame, and that's how he got publicity. Today, he's riding on the crest of Western press canonizing him. And so me, as an individual studying this, I'm not so certain. I don't know which Navalny is the right one, the one the KGB beats up on, and I still call him KGB, excuse me.
Right.
I actually, and maybe Angela has too, have seen the so-called video of him where he pulls out a pistol and he shoots Angela, the word is a chorny, a dark one. Now, I'm sorry, guys, this is racism, this is xenophobia, this is Russian nationalism in its worst form. And he has, for a time in his career, been a champion of that. So who is Navalny? We don't know. All I know is I wonder about somebody who flies back to Moscow and then is put in prison, decides to go on a hunger strike.
He wouldn't be the first politician to say one thing and really mean another and believe another.
Shelley. Oh no, surely you jest.
Angela suggests that Navalny is to Putin as Steve Bannon is to Trump.
Good.
Interesting love-hate. But Michelle Eaton asked an interesting question about the relationship between Navalny and Putin. And I'm wondering if the economy is the subtext to this. She asked, what is it about Navalny that has stymied Putin compared to other rivals? That Navalny seems to have more staying power.
Okay, again, that's a Western view. There are several protest leaders. The one I'm most interested in is a guy by the name of Vladimir Kara-Murza. Now, he too was poisoned by Putin. He participated and still does in something called Open Russia, which is a political movement urging economic reforms, social justice, and political justification. And he was poisoned first in 2015, and then again in 2017. Unlike Navalny, he didn't go back to Russia. He writes now and then for the Washington Post, and he's in a study group in London. And here's an interesting thing, guys. He was a pallbearer for John McCain. Have you ever heard of him? Nobody's ever heard of him. He's not the media darling, but he's got staying power. And by the way, the other pallbearer next to him was a guy named Joe Biden. So, you know, Shelley, I'm not being overly critical, but we jump to conclusions. Somebody becomes the media darling, and we kind of overlook all the other grinded out players in the process. And I think Angela would agree. There are a lot of very wonderful and dedicated people who are trying to get change in that society. So,
but wouldn't you agree that Navalny is not only the symbol in the West, he certainly appears to be the symbol in Russia. And when he speaks, thousands of people take to the streets. I have not heard another, I've heard the name that you mentioned. I don't know him well, but certainly Navalny seems to have temporarily a following greater than the others. Is that fair to say?
I question it.
Okay.
And I want Angela to respond sooner or later. These protest movements would take place with or without Navalny. And out in Vladivostok, when you get 30, 40, 50,000 people protesting and Navalny is in a hospital, he hasn't got anything to do with getting those people out in that bitter cold wind of Vladivostok. Those people are out because, can I use a French expression? They're pissed off. Okay, and Navalny may or may not be why they turn up. He sure does speak a lot. I guess I'm getting too hard on Navalny. I better back off a little. I'm not trying to demonize him, but I think what's unfolding in Russia would happen whether or not he's making the call to arms, as it were, because there are hundreds of others who are doing so. And this is a mass movement, and he may symbolize a part of it, and he may energize a part of it, but he's far from being the chosen leader. He's a bit player, and here we're talking about, oh boy, we'll really land on Putin if this guy dies in prison because he refuses to eat. I just, Shelley, I'm a born skeptic, particularly when it comes to Russians. I'm sorry to say.
Well, you must have been a journalist in your other life. That's good to be a skeptic. What if Navalny dies in prison? Then what? What do you see transpiring?
I suspect there'll be a period of both Western concern expressed, American, European, and so on. Yes, I think it's horrible the way he's been treated. Okay. I don't question that whatsoever. And I think it would be tragic for a good man. And I think basically he is good, but there are two people there. I don't know which to follow. But after he goes, this movement will go on without him. That's the best thing I can say. This movement, and it will go on because economic conditions will continue to worsen. And
so, well, I'm glad you brought up economic conditions again, because Lee Mackey asked something that I was going to ask, and we know that the pipeline to Germany is 90-some% complete. Yes. Even though the prices of gas and oil are way down compared to what they were, once that's complete, will that relieve some of the economic pressure in Russia?
No, and I'll tell you why. There's too much oil and gas in the world. This is not a Russian decision to make. I mean, there's too much. Texas knows this, New Mexico knows this, the Saudis know this. There's too much oil and gas supply that's far outstripped demand. Demand also is going down. So about the pipelines, 70% or 80% of Russia's export is to the West. It goes through pipelines. 80% of that went through Ukraine. Nowadays, and even after Nord Stream, which is the pipe they're talking about, 60% goes through Ukraine. That's why Ukraine is such an important issue. 60% of his oil has to go through Ukraine to get to the West. And so they went to establish this pipeline through the Baltic Sea. It goes from Russia through the Baltic Sea, 800 miles to Germany. There is already one pipeline there, Nord Stream 1, number 1. And we're talking now about Nord Stream 2, number 2. It is 90% complete. The existing pipe up there, Shelley, and whoever asked the question, it carries about 20%. The estimate is when the number 2 pipe comes along, it'll carry about 30%. 50, 60% will still have to go through Ukraine. And all of that is declining in need. If you look at the policy of Germany, they're going to be green independent by such and such a date. So the short run, maybe it'll be some economic relief, but for the mid-range and the long range, this is not a good horse to be betting on. And by the way, I noticed that Bill Gates is talking about clean nuclear and a smaller packaging, and the Germans have already said they're going to do that because they don't want to be held hostage by palookas like Putin. And not only that, their population is sick and tired of climate change. So,
and who knows who's going to come after that palooka. Before I get to the various questions in the chat, and there are many, you mentioned Ukraine. What is Putin's objective there? Obviously, it's not to invade Ukraine because that would, but what is he just trying to do? To keep them at bay, to keep us, the West, looking here, and while he's doing foolishness someplace else? What is going on?
This is the Russian tough guy, okay? The Russian people are very perturbed that they lost their empire. They lost, Shelley, when the old Soviet Empire dissolved. They lost roughly 1 million square miles as everybody broke off. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, whatever. So his posture, and I think it's probably correct, is his objective, his geostrategic objective, is to rebuild the empire. I'm the guy who's going to do this. We're going to Russia. He invented this expression, Shelley. It goes something like this: make Russia great again.
We've heard that before.
Well, someone borrowed it. Don't you know? Yes. One of his friends borrowed it. But make Russia great again, which means roll back to the old days. And the number one keystone for all of that is Ukraine. Ukraine is the largest country in Europe, except for Russian part of Europe. It's larger than Spain, Germany, any of the rest of them. This is not a small place. And it's a very strong place in the sense that there's they have political disagreement, but one thing they agree upon is they don't want to be rolled over by anybody, not Nazis, not Putin, certainly don't want to be ruled by the Russians again. So as a result, this is key to his expansionism, Shelley. If Ukraine fell, then the other dominoes would drop. Excuse me for using an old journalist expression, the dominoes would drop. So it's key. As far as him invading, he knows, and the Ukrainians know, that he cannot unleash full-scale war. And the reason why is the Ukrainians would blow up those damn pipelines, and that would be the end of Russia's economy and West Europeans' economy. So he knows the Ukrainians are not to monkey around with in this. So what he's doing is the old Hitler game. It's called, I'm for peace. Putin, I want peace. I want a piece of this, I want a piece of that, I want a piece of the third thing. And so he's trying to nibble away a little piece at a time. Joe Biden knows what he's up to. And Joe Biden has called his bluff. And he did so by saying, he's a killer. And he is a killer. And so what is Putin? Putin was very upset. He called me a killer. Oh, I'll muster my troops along the border of Ukraine. And then this afternoon, well, they're going back into the barracks.
So as long as you mention that, Bob asked, is there something behind the scenes about why they want new, quote, permanent bases on the border of Ukraine? Or is that just more of the same?
Okay. We need to look at the geography a little bit. They seized Crimea Peninsula nobody, almost overnight, nobody knew they were going to do that. That's the island sticking down in the Black Sea. And then they decided to, using volunteers, invade eastern Ukraine. It's about 1/10 of the total square mileage of Ukraine. It's called the Donbass. That means the basin of the Don River. It's in eastern Ukraine. Heavily industrial, mining, and so on. It has, because it's on the border with Russia, mixed population. Mixed in the sense that there are ethnic Russians, there are ethnic Ukrainians. If you leave them alone, they mix together nicely. But if you stir them up, you've got the means of an invasion. So I think the Ukrainians have come to the conclusion that they will not try to recapture Donbass. They'll let the Russians have Donbass, provided they have an ironclad guarantee from the United Nations and NATO that no more, not another peace, but this will be the end of it. And already an agreement's been signed in Minsk that kind of lays out the plan for that. And I think that's what the resolution will be. He's never going to get all of Ukraine because they'll blow up the pipelines, but he will get this sliver, 10% in eastern Ukraine. The Ukrainians will give it to him, but not without our guarantees. By ours, I mean the West and United Nations.
And so the massing at the border and the quote permanent bases, that's just to pressure the world, yes, to make them know that he's there.
And also to let Zelensky in Kyiv know that he's there, because this is going to be two guys trading in the end. They're going to be sitting down, giving and taking. This is preparation for final negotiation. I hope, because I sure as hell hope they don't start shooting. I mean, shooting more than they are.
So you said, rightly so, certainly, that Putin wants to recreate the Russian Empire. He has said.
Yes.
Do the Russian people want that?
Yeah, but they'd rather have a lot of food instead. Angela may have heard of this joke. It's very popular in Russia. So somebody, probably an American journalist, Shelley, says, well, how are things going? Well, you know, he's been around 20 years. And the Russian says, well, you know, things are getting better, but they're getting worse faster.
Very true.
So they're a little tired of it being told it's getting better, but they're very concerned about it getting worse a whole lot faster.
So Angela asks if the Ukrainians would give up Donbass in exchange for admitting Ukraine to NATO, which is obviously a hot button. And if not, what other guarantee could they take that Russia won't bite off another piece?
Good question. Good observation by Angela, actually. Yes. In fact, NATO would be the supreme accomplishment of this that would come out of, as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, and really the Americans. That's a reach. And this is going to require multinational US, European, Russian, and Ukrainian negotiations. Frankly, I'm not sure the Russians will let it go that well. I'm not sure Putin will back off that far. So it's good to make that a negotiating point. He's going to make his negotiating point. What we have to hope for realistically in the world of diplomatic negotiation is something in between. And I'm sorry, Angela, I don't know what that in between is yet, but I'm thinking short of NATO, they're going to have to provide some ironclad guarantees. NATO would be the very best guarantee, because a lot of you know that up in the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, they exist because of NATO, because without the NATO umbrella, they'd be gone in a day. The Russians.
And the NATO countries, including the US, do they want to expand the umbrella to Ukraine?
Well, if you look back from the year 2000 to the present, there has been a steady progression of that, including, we don't have time to talk about the nation of Georgia, but they were engaged in conversations to join NATO. And a couple months later, Putin invaded and nobody could do anything about it. First of all, the Americans think Georgia is down there next to Mississippi or someplace, you know, so it's the same dynamic though. That's kind of, if you want to say Putin has a red line, that might be it. I don't know for sure. But Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, their German aircraft, their French aircraft flying round the clock umbrella coverage, and their ground troops on the ground there, they're a tripwire, and Putin cannot cross it. So
Right.
maybe they'll find some middle ground. I surely imagine so, but oh boy, NATO would be the best.
So Bob Yonker asked if the US is concerned or should be concerned about Russian plans to restrict navigation in the Black Sea. That's a pretty specific question.
It's a very, very good one. And I'll tell you why. There's a United Nations agreement on the laws of the sea. And 87 nations have agreed to it, including China, including Russia, and so on. Now, what this law says is that you may restrict shipping within 12 miles of your border, of your sea border. 13 miles is open. So that's the territorial limit at sea. So, and that applies to the Black Sea and everywhere else on Earth. There are negotiations about specific channels and so on. But by and large, 87 nations have agreed to that. There's only one nation that for the last 20 years has refused to sign that United Nations agreement. Does anybody know who that is? It's the USA. We don't want no damn foreigners telling where our Navy can go, by God. So we aren't going to agree with that. And that we're the only holdouts. So there's a lot of mixed emotions going in here, but Putin dare not go beyond 12 miles to interfere with shipping, because then he's in violation of universally agreed. I don't know, maybe he'll say, I'm going to do it because the Americans don't even believe it.
Just to poke a finger at us. You know, during this kind of strange back and forth with Putin and Biden, you know, sanctions and then kicking out guys and then reaching out and I want to talk. The discussion came up about renewing or extending the START agreement, nuclear weapons. Is there any likelihood under the current situation of that really happening? And whose interest is it to do that?
Both of us. I was looking at some data the other day, but first let me try to answer the question. Yes, it's entirely possible because old nuclear arsenals are extremely expensive to maintain and keep safe. I live in a state where the main purpose is at Los Alamos is not to create weapons anymore. I have a lot of neighbors that work up there. Their purpose is to keep what we've got safe. And every month, that's more and more difficult and more expensive to do. And I have to believe the Russians are going through the same process. It's costly, it's difficult, it's not safe. So for practical, not ideological, not world politics, but for practical reasons, it's in the interest of both parties to get this done. Whether they will or not, I'm quite sure prior to Joe Biden, it would not have gotten done. But I'm really optimistic that Biden's got a handle on this. And the people around Putin who understand they're wasting billions trying to maintain this arsenal, much less build more. I have to believe that practical economic reasons will prevail in the end and make this a safer world. Please, no one listening, don't hold me accountable if it doesn't happen.
Would that play well with the Russian people? Is that something they would like to see happen?
They lost 140 million people during the war. 140. We lost 400,000. There's a long, long Russian memory of agony and invasion and war. And even though these 20 or 30-year-olds didn't live through it, there's enough of a collective remembrance of that terrible, terrible consequences of war. And I have to believe all the Russians I've met from all walks of life, from laborers to professors to whatever, and I first visit there was in 1967, the year before I came to Bradley, doing my PhD research. Across all of that time, under all of those different rulers, I never sensed on their own Russian thinking, war is a good thing. No, it was quite the reverse. So yeah, I think the Russian people would be very pleased with proper steps toward security for them and their grandchildren in the future. Yeah, I think so.
It's been more than 50 years since you first went to Russia, and I obviously went many times. Do they have an understanding of what the U.S. is, or what is their understanding of the U.S.? Because obviously all of that's shaped by what you're told through the media and your politicians, and they're told something very different.
Television.
Yeah.
Hollywood. One time I was over there and they asked me about Dallas. How's it going to turn out? I'm sorry if I'm revealing my age, but you're up to date. It's the same thing, Yeah, it's all. So yeah, I once brought a student to Bradley to do his MBA from Russia, and then he caught on with Caterpillar. He learned his English by watching TV on video cassettes when he was serving on a nuclear submarine in the Arctic Ocean. He had never taken English in school at all. So, what's their image? Their image is, Shelley, I bet you travel a lot around the world. And what is the impression of if you meet somebody on Indonesia? What do they think about Americans? They got a lot of money. They waste a lot. They're big. They walk funny. They're so aggressive. They're just out of it. Yeah, the Russians have that same view, although they wish they could be just like us.
So I can tell you that we were in Holland many years ago, and waiting in line at a windmill, I believe, and the ticket taker, there were a couple people ahead of my wife, and she spoke German to the first person, then she spoke French to the next person. And when my wife got up, she started speaking English. And my wife said, "Now you did all this, and then you spoke English to me. How did you know?" And she said, "Well, you're an American, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, but how did you know?" "Well, see your husband over there? He's the guy with white socks and a hat and shorts on. All Americans dress like that." So that's so there's some truth to that.
In the old days, Angela, it used to be the shoes. They could spot you in a split second. A Russian could surely tell it was your shoes.
And the teeth. For when I visit with people, I can tell Russians and East Europeans by their teeth.
The gold and aluminum and stuff.
Is there what is it? Beatrix asks, what is the best way to deter Putin? Sanctions, isolation? What's your recommendation on that?
Terrific question. Yes, sanctions. Sanctions do work. They have really harmed a lot of people in the Russian. Okay, you go after the people with the money. About 24 of them have all this money. and they're parking as much of it offshore as they can. They're Russians, after all. They're planning on tomorrow. When Putin falls, their billions will be somewhere in a bank in Germany. Well, if you put pressure and restrictions on that in your sanctions, there's a banking thing called SWIFT, international banking back and forth. If you hammer that, there will be hurt very dearly. And those 24 people, they will force a change in Putin's policy. Yeah, it's down to money. Yeah, and that's how you get pressure by applying sanctions like that. I mean, the last set of sanctions that Obama did, Exxon pulled out of a $200 billion project in Arctic waters, and that just devastated the oil people in Russia. I mean, but the oil people, I mean, those with billions.
But I guess I ask, to what end? Will that get Putin to change his ways, or will that make him more aggressive?
They will get him to change his ways, because the bottom line is what counts for them. They got no ideology, Shelley. It's all about getting billions, parking it offshore, and when the so-called stuff hits the fan, you're gone. But if you don't have access to it, you're really in trouble.
So
Yeah.
we'll go back to Ukraine for a moment. Bob asked, have the Russians flown Turkish-made drones over Donbass and used them to attack? Is that a new phenomenon?
That Russians use drones, yes, a lot. I haven't read where they use Turkish-built ones, because they've got their own. In fact, they sell Russian drones to the Turks.
Okay.
And they also sell the most sophisticated SAM, surface-to-air missiles.
Right.
The Ukrainians, by the way, have a wonderful fleet of drones, because the very best aerospace technology during the Soviet era was done in Ukraine. And when the split came, all of those geniuses, engineers and inventors, aircraft planners, they didn't leave to go to Russia. They stayed in Ukraine. So they really have, the Ukrainians, state-of-the-art hovering, and it scares the devil out of the Russians because they can't track them, drones. So that's another impediment. That's another reason why Putin can't launch all-out warfare. So yeah.
I think Angela asked us, I think she knows the answer because it sounds like her, but it says she wants you to talk about the summer program in the Soviet Union with Bradley students in the 90s. And then she says, no food.
Yeah, we took a couple of groups starting in the summer. Actually, my first group was the summer of 1969. Can you believe that? And then when we took some a few years later, it was quite a different environment. One young woman from New Jersey, Jewish American woman, met her Jewish American relatives in Kiev, and we made that happen for her. So nowadays it would be just routine, but in those days it was very exciting. Let me say, we brought about 50 Russian students to Bradley, to Peoria, in a combined program with the engine division at Caterpillar and the Training Institute. And those students came here, we gave them a semester. The best ones we brought back for an MBA. They had internships at Caterpillar, and one of them is still a Caterpillar engineer. Her name is Marina Waters, married an American Caterpillar engineer, and now they have a house full of young future Caterpillar engineers, Russian Americans, every one of them. Those are the things I am most pleased and proud of having been a part of, Angela. It was really heartwarming to see how they grabbed those opportunities and made the most of them.
Let me interject, Shelley. Marina works with my husband, Sean, at CAT,
No. Oh,
Seriously.
you know what? She still sends me a Christmas card with a photo of the kids every year. Now that's true. That's the measure.
Without you, she'd have a totally different life.
And I met her parents on a little excursion boat in the middle of the Volga River off the shore of Samara, Russia, and they practically kissed my shoes and hands and every place else when I told them we had picked her to come. So there, Angela, I'm so happy to hear that. Say hello for me.
She's not
mentioned her.
She's not one of those people who the TV series The Americans was patterned after, is it?
No.
That's a great show.
It is.
Last question is about Putin's cyber attacks.
Yes.
And Michelle asks, do you anticipate they're going to increase, and what kind of retaliation would you expect?
We, the Americans, invented cyber warfare, okay? Something called Stuxnet. The Americans and the Israelis shut down the Iranian nuclear plutonium enrichment program. Okay, we invented this concept. So let me tell you, we're pretty sharp at it ourselves. Under the present administration, the response was, the Russian attack was fake news. Look it up. You'll see. That's what we told them. Under Biden, he knows better. And Putin knows that Biden knows better. And for every inroad they made with us, we can do it 100-fold over them. So long, hard negotiations is what's going to back them off. Technically, the technological process, you can't accomplish, because technology never stays still. It keeps changing. Action, counteraction, counteraction. But good, tough American sanctions and good steps of our own in cyber, that'll stop it.
And you anticipate the Russians will continue to meddle in elections?
Well, sure, but I think less. And I think they did less in 20 than they did in 16. And it's because we've caught on to them. We were caught off guard in 16, but not in 20. And I think that Biden will make it clear they'll have a heavier price to pay.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Joe, it's been a delightful. If you get back to Peoria and out of beautiful New Mexico, I'd love to meet you someday. That would be great fun.
Do you know, Lynn and Julie Carl have said we ought to do that.
Lynn and Julie Carl, I know very well. They're great.
I know, you know. My wife taught with Julie and Lynn for years.
Yeah, old friends. I have not seen them for a long time, but I'm sure you're good buddies with Alan Galsky as well.
Oh yeah, Al was a character.
I'm still in touch with Alan, so he's out west.
Tell him I said hello.
I will do so. Angela, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Roach. This has been a nice, lively discussion. So I don't think I disagreed with you on anything. So thank you for bringing us along and for giving us some insights that were quite interesting on Russia, Ukraine, and our good friend Vlad. So on behalf of the Peoria Area World Affairs Council, thank you everyone for joining us for Global Peoria. Tomorrow, remember, we are going to tune in to the World Affairs Council of Kentucky for their program on climate sustainability at 11 a.m. Next week, we've got a terrific program with Frankie Sturm, who is a local kid gone big, we'll say. He is a Foreign Service officer, and he's going to talk about the life of a Foreign Service officer. He serves in Suriname. And so next Friday, April 30th, join us for Frankie Sturm, A Day in the Life of a Foreign Service Officer. And then we've filled up May. So stay tuned and read your emails and come along for the ride.
Angela.
Thank you again. Yes.
Angela, Frankie was in my wife's 6th grade class at Mossville. One of her favorite students. What a coincidence.
It is a small world. It is a small world.
Yeah.
So.
Hey,